The knock came at dusk on the 11th of October, and Nicodemus Frayne, who was 46 years old and had not answered a knock in 3 years, set down his coffee and did not move. He knew every sound that country made: wind in the standing brush, a wagon on the section line, the tin whine of his own windmill. A knock was not on the list. It came again, 3 times, unhurried, the knock of somebody who had walked a long way and did not intend to walk back. He opened the door. A woman stood on his step with the last of the light behind her. 35 years old, plain gray dress gone white at the elbows, hat that had been rained on more than once. Behind her, 3 children stood in the yard in a straight line, like fence posts somebody had set with a string. A boy of 11 holding a rope, a girl of 8 holding a bundle, and a small one, 4, holding onto the girl's skirt with one fist and looking at Frayne's boots. "Mr. Frayne, my name is Tirzah Bowlin. I've been 3 weeks in Pennyroyal, and I've heard your name 11 times, and every time the same way, that you've got the biggest stand of broomcorn in Lincoln County, and not one soul to cut it." Frayne said nothing. He had a habit of not filling silences. She did not seem to require filling. She looked at him levelly, the way a person looks across a table at a business partner rather than up at a benefactor. "My children need a roof," she said, "and you need someone. That's the whole of it. I'm not asking you to be generous. I'm telling you what you get." For the rest of his life, people asked him what he decided that evening, and he always said he hadn't decided anything, that the door was already open by then, and a door, once open, has its own opinions. He stepped back and let them in. The house had 6 rooms, and Frayne used one of them. He had built it in 1887 for his mother, Tirzah Frayne, who came out from Ohio to keep house for her only son and died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1893, at 71. He had shut that door afterward, and most of the others, and slept in the kitchen on a cot because the stove was in there, and the stove did not remind him of anything. Tirzah Bowlin walked those rooms with a lamp and did not say one word about the dust. "4 rooms," she said, coming back, "and wages, $9 a month until the brush is sold, then we talk again like sensible people." She set the lamp down. "I'll not live on anybody's kindness, Mr. Frayne. Kindness runs out. Wages get paid." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know broomcorn? I was raised in it. Douglas County, Illinois. I hurled brush before I could read." She said it without pride, the way another woman might say she could sew. "My husband was Newland Bowlin. He kept a broom shop in Chandler, a good man and a poor bookkeeper. He died of the lung fever a year ago last March, asleep and easy at the end, which I'm grateful for. The shop went to the note holder. What's left is in that wagon, and it fits. And them?" Frayne looked past her at the 3 children, who had arranged themselves on the bench by the door and were being unnaturally quiet. "That's Adley. He's 11, Sonora's 8. The little one's Pharaoh. He's 4, and he does not talk to strangers, so don't take it personal." She paused. "They've had a bed every night of their lives, Mr. Frayne. Reverend Pettijohn's wife has kept us 3 weeks and would keep us a 4th. I'm not standing here because we're desperate. I'm standing here because I counted your acres from the road, and you cannot cut them by yourself, and I would rather be useful than be looked after." $9, he said, and the 4 rooms. That was the whole negotiation. It took under a minute, and it changed the price of brush in 3 counties, though nobody in that room knew it yet. Broomcorn is not a forgiving crop, and 1896 was not a forgiving year. What matters in it is not the seed but the brush, the fine straight fiber of the head, which has to be cut in the right week or not at all. Let it stand 4 days too long and the sun turns it red, and red brush brings a third the money of green. Frayne had 80 acres, and he had done everything right up to the part where a man learns that 80 acres of broomcorn wants a crew of 14, and he is one. He was less than a fifth cut, and the red was coming on the west 40, like a slow burn. The morning after she arrived, she walked that west 40 with him at sunup, pulled a head down, ran it through her fingers, and said, 3 days, maybe 4. It's 4 days' work for 11 men. Then we don't do it the way 11 men would. She reorganized his entire harvest before breakfast. They cut the reddening west 40 first and let the seed go. The seed was worth pennies, she said, and the hours were worth dollars, and Frayne, who had been trying to save both, felt something unknot in his chest. Adley got a knife filed short for his reach, and took to it like he'd been born on it. Sonora ran the tally board and came out, at settling, accurate within 4 bundles. Pharaoh sat in the wagon shade with a canteen and an office, keeper of the water, which he held with tremendous seriousness. His mother had drawn a line in the dirt short of the knives, and the line was law. They got the west 40 in 3.5 days. Frayne, who had not spoken 40 words in a day since his mother died, found himself talking across the rows about seed varieties and the price of jute twine, and once about his mother, which surprised him so much he stopped mid-sentence and never finished it. Tirzah did not push. She only said, "The room with the morning window ought to be Sonora's, if you don't mind it." "I don't mind it," he said, and found that he did not. The brush went into the shed to cure, and in November they hauled the first 4 tons into Pennyroyal, and that is where they met Lorenzo Steadwell. Steadwell was 57 and owned the broomworks at the end of Kyle Street, 22 hands, 4 winder benches, and the only buying scale within 40 miles. Every stalk of brush in the county crossed it or went nowhere. He had a rule, printed on a card and nailed to the post: brush bought only from yards of record. All other offered at cull rate. Grade is the houses. A yard of record meant a grower who had sold to Steadwell 3 years running. Frayne had sold to him never. Steadwell came out in his shirt sleeves, walked the wagon once, and said, "Mixed, red in it." "Cull, there is not one red head in that wagon," Tirzah said. Steadwell looked at her for the first time. "And you'd be. I'd be the one who cut it. Grade is the houses, ma'am. It's on the post." She did not argue. Frayne, at the wheel, with the fight coming up in his throat, felt her hand close on his forearm. One short pressure, the way you'd check a horse, and then she climbed up on the box and said, pleasantly, to the whole street, "Then we'll keep it." They hauled 4 tons of green brush home again. That night, Frayne said the thing that had been building in him for 6 hours. "He'll break us. He's the only scale." "He's the only scale for brush," Tirzah said. "He is not the only scale for brooms." Here is what Steadwell did not know, because he had never asked. Newland Bowlin's shop had failed for want of a bookkeeper, not for want of brooms, and his widow had spent 9 years tying and sewing them. She could price a hank of brush to the quarter cent, and she could do it by hand. Her father had gone dim-eyed at 60 and taught her to grade by feel, the spring of the fiber against the thumb, the weight at the balance point, the small dry rasp good brush makes and mildewed brush does not. "Anybody can see red," he used to say. "Seeing is the cheap half." They put the winter into it. Frayne floored the machine shed with scrap plank and came back from Guthrie with a second-hand foot treadle winder and 80 pounds of wire. Tirzah showed him the drying tiers, brush laid loose and single layer on slat racks, air moving through, no bale weight on it. Steadwell's shed baled brush green and stacked it, and stacked brush sweats. By the third week of January, they were making brooms. Adley cut and sorted. Sonora learned the flat stitch. Pharaoh sat on a nail keg in a cloud of chaff and handed people things. Tirzah tied 14 brooms a day, then 18, then 22, and everyone carried a mark Frayne burned into the handle with a hot wire, a small square with a P inside it, for Pennyroyal. They sold off the wagon in Chandler and Stroud, and to the section houses on the Frisco line. In March, the wholesale house in Guthrie ordered 900, and in April, for the first time in 19 years, Steadwell's buying yard sat half empty in cutting season, because 40 growers had found out there was a second door. It would be a satisfying story if that were the end of it. It would also be the wrong one. In June of 1897, Cheever Gass died, 60 years old, Steadwell's grader for 11 years, gone peacefully in his own chair one afternoon. A week after the funeral, Frayne came out of the feed store and found Lorenzo Steadwell at the buying scale with a hank of brush held 8 inches from his face, turning it again in the flat white light of a June noon. Frayne watched a while and understood. He did not tell the town. He told one person, that night at his own table. Tirzah was quiet a long moment. He'll lose the works. He can't read the color anymore, and gas was his eyes. Frayne turned his cup. He built that rule to keep men like me out. I've thought about this day for 2 years. I thought I'd enjoy it more. Send Sonora, she said. Sonora Bowlin was 9 that summer, and already the fastest hand grader in the county, because a child who learns a thing with her hands at 8 does not have to think about it at 9. She walked into Steadwell's yard on a Tuesday with a note from her mother in her pocket that she never delivered, having forgotten it entirely. Steadwell was at the scale with a hank held at arm's length and his jaw set. "Mister," Sonora said, "you're doing it with your eyes." 22 hands stopped working in the shed behind him. Steadwell turned around slowly and looked down at a 9-year-old in a dress with chaff in the hem. "I beg your pardon?" "Eyes is the cheap half," she recited. "Grandpa Odell went dim at 60, and he graded till he was 81. She reached up and took the hank out of his hand, which no employee of that works had ever done, and held it at the balance point and gave it one short shake, and it made a small, dry, rasping sound. "Hear that? That's good and dry. Mildew don't rasp, it thuds." She put it back in his hands and pushed his thumb into the fiber. "Now bend it. Green springs back slow. Red don't hardly spring at all. It just gives up." She let go. "You can do a whole load like that. You don't need to see one thing." There was a silence in that yard that men who were present described, 40 years later, as the loudest thing they ever heard. Lorenzo Steadwell stood with a hank of broomcorn in his 2 hands, and his eyes shut, and bent it, and shook it, and listened, and something in his face came apart. "Who taught you that?" he said, and his voice was not steady. "My mama, Mrs. Bowlin, out at the Frayne place. The yard I called Cull." "Yes, sir," said Sonora, who had no talent for tact, and went home to her dinner. He came out to the farm in the first week of July and sat in the kitchen with his hat on his knees. He did not apologize for the rule. He was not a man who could say it in a sentence, and Tirzah did not require it. What he said was, "I wrote that card in 1878, after a yard in Kansas sold me 11 ton that had been rained on in the shock and stacked wet. It was my brother's money. It rotted in my own shed, and I paid him back for 9 years. He looked at his hands. "I decided then I'd trust the grade and not the grower. It worked 18 years. Then it made a fool of me in my own yard in front of a child." "It didn't make you a fool," Tirzah said. "It made you alone. Those are different, and only one of them is fatal. She taught him 2 hours at her own table, then sent him home with a hank in his coat pocket to practice on, the way you'd send a man home with a hymnal. He came back Thursday, and every Thursday for 11 years. The last piece is the one Frayne never talked about much, and it is the reason the story got told at all. In the autumn of 1898, the works paper came due, and Steadwell, half-blind, short a grader, 40 growers gone, could not carry it. The Guthrie house that held the note came to Pennyroyal looking for a buyer, and there was exactly one outfit in the county with the cash and the trade to take it, and everybody knew whose. They offered it to Tirzah Bowlin at a price that was, frankly, a gift. She carried it into the Grange Hall on the first Monday of November and stood up in front of 90 people with Lorenzo Steadwell in the 4th row holding his hat, and said this. Men who were there wrote it down afterward and got it near enough right. I could buy those works this week, and I'll tell you plainly that I want to. 2 years ago that man's card cost me 4 ton in a winter, and I've thought about owning his scale nearly every day since. But I've been in this county 25 months. Mr. Steadwell has been in it 19 years. He put the first buying scale west of the river, and every grower here has been paid off it, including the ones angry at him tonight. A trade isn't a scale, and it isn't a card on a post. It's who taught who, and there's not a hand in this room he didn't teach something to. So I'll not buy him. I'll carry the paper at cost, at 4%. His name stays on that building, and I'll take my price in brush at an honest grade for 10 years, hand-graded, by a grader he chooses. That is not charity, Mr. Steadwell, so don't you stand up and call it that. It's the best trade I'll make this year, and I'd thank the rest of you not to tell him so. Lorenzo Steadwell stood up anyway. He stood a long time before anything came out, and what finally came was, the grade was never the house's. I want that read into the minutes. The grade belongs to whoever's honest enough to hold it in their hands. He sat down. The card came off the post the next morning. Steadwell took it down himself, made no speech about it, and that afternoon the 2 yards began buying at the same price on the same scale, which they did for 22 years. He graded by hand until he was 73 and died peacefully at 76, leaving the works in 3 parts, one to his brother's children, one to his foreman, and one to Tirzah Bowlin, who by then was 26 and ran it. Nicodemus Frayne married Tirzah Bowlin in the spring of 1899 in the front room, before 19 people. He was 49 and she was 38, and neither made a speech, because neither was any good at it. Pharaoh carried the ring on a broom tie of red twine, being 7 by then, and past the age of holding on to skirts. Adley gave his mother away. Sonora kept a tally of the guests, out of habit. There is a photograph of that house, taken in 1934 for the County Historical Society, and if you find it, you will notice something about the front door. It is standing open, in a photograph taken in February. The hook and eye latch is gone. There is a place on the frame where it used to be, and the wood is a different color there, and it stayed that color as long as the house stood. Frayne unhooked that latch on the evening of the 11th of October, 1896, to open the door to a woman who had come to make him a fair offer, and he never hooked it again. Not that winter, not the next one, not in 41 years. His wife teased him about it. His children teased him about it. He never once explained himself. In the last spring of his life, Pharaoh Frayne, 85, 60 years in the broom trade, still no talker, was asked by a young man from the university what the family had been proudest of. There's people who'll tell you my mother saved that farm, and she did. And people who'll tell you she made a friend out of the man who'd wronged her, and she did that too, and it was harder. But what I remember is a door. I was 4. It was near dark and cold, and I was hanging on to my sister, and a man I'd never seen opened his door and stepped back out of the way. He didn't say a kind word. He hardly said anything. He just moved out of the doorway and let us come in out of it. He looked out the window a while. "That's all it ever takes," he said. "Somebody has to move out of the doorway. Everything else, every broom, every hank, every one of those Thursdays she taught that old man to grade by hand, all of it came through a door a quiet man opened one time, and then, God bless him, never got around to closing.